Yeah, you staged it!
The evening air in Westminster was about to witness something that would send shockwaves through British politics forever. Labour leader Keir Starmer was strolling with Shadow Foreign Secretary David Lammy, completely unaware that a hostile mob was waiting to pounce. Then it happened. Without warning, dozens of furious protesters suddenly surrounded them both. The word traitor exploded from their mouths, each chant more vicious than the last. But that was just the beginning of what would become one of the most shocking political confrontations in recent British history. The crowd pressed closer, their faces twisted with rage. Then came the accusations that would make every headline across the nation. Jimmy Savile, they screamed, accusing Starmer of protecting pedophiles. The Labour leader's composure cracked as he realized this wasn't an ordinary political protest. This was personal warfare. Police officers rushed forward as the situation spiraled completely out of control. You could see the panic spreading through their ranks as they understood this mob wasn't just angry about policies. They believed they were confronting a man who had helped cover up child abuse. Officers were forced to bundle Starmer into a police vehicle while the crowd continued their relentless attack.
You staged. You're a child abuser! You child abuser! You child abuser! Where's Jimmy Savile? Where's Jimmy Savile?
But what triggered this explosive confrontation? The truth behind this story is more disturbing than anyone imagined, and it starts with one desperate prime minister's most reckless gamble. 7 days earlier, Boris Johnson was drowning. The Sue Gray report into Downing Street lockdown parties was destroying his credibility piece by piece. His approval ratings were in freefall, his own MPs were plotting against him, and he needed something dramatic to change the narrative, so he did the unthinkable. During Prime Minister's questions, Johnson launched what many called the most disgraceful attack in parliamentary history. He accused Starmer of spending his time as Director of Public Prosecutions, prosecuting journalists, and failing to prosecute Jimmy Savile. The chamber erupted in absolute disbelief. Even Johnson's own MPs looked stunned by what they had just witnessed. The accusation was calculated, vicious, and completely false. But Johnson knew exactly what weapons he was unleashing into the political bloodstream.
We can do, it's £9.1 billion, Mr. Speaker. It's huge sums that we're using to help people across the country. And the only reason we can afford it, Mr. Speaker, is because we have a strong economy, the fastest growing in the G7, as I think I may have pointed out to the right honourable gentleman last week, and not just last year, but this year as well.
Here's the real story that Johnson deliberately twisted for his own survival. Between 2007 and 2008, 4 women came forward with allegations against Jimmy Savile. The claims dated back to the 1970s, when Savile was at the height of his fame as a beloved TV presenter. Local police investigated, but the evidence was considered insufficient for prosecution. The decision not to charge Savile was made by local prosecutors and reviewing lawyers, not by Starmer personally. In fact, there's absolutely no evidence that Starmer even knew about the Savile allegations during his time as head of the Crown Prosecution Service. The cases were handled at a much lower level, never reaching the director's desk, but the story gets even more complex when you understand what happened after Savile's death in 2011. A year later, a documentary exposed the horrifying truth about Savile's decades of abuse. Hundreds of victims came forward, revealing one of Britain's worst child abuse scandals. The full scale of his crimes shocked the entire nation. Institutions across the country had failed to protect vulnerable children and young people. Starmer, still heading the Crown Prosecution Service at the time, did something that showed real leadership. He ordered a complete review of how the CPS had handled the original allegations. He appointed principal legal advisor Alison Levitt, QC, to examine every decision. The review found that if police and prosecutors had approached the allegations differently, prosecutions might have been possible in 3 of the 4 cases. Starmer took full responsibility on behalf of his organization and implemented changes to prevent similar failures. It was accountability in action, but Johnson would later twist this integrity into a weapon of political destruction.
Instead, Mr. Speaker, this leader of the opposition, a former Director of Public Prosecutions, Mr. Speaker. So he spent most of his time prosecuting journalists and failing to prosecute Jimmy Savile, as far as I can make out, Mr. Speaker. He, Mr. Speaker, chose to use this moment. He used this moment, Mr. Speaker, continually to prejudge a police inquiry. That's what he chose to do.
Fast forward to that incident evening, and Johnson's lies had spread like poison through social media and conspiracy networks. Far-right groups seized on his false claims, amplifying them through their online echo chambers. What started as a desperate parliamentary attack had morphed into something far more dangerous. The analysis of what happened that night reveals the full horror of how lies can radicalize ordinary people. Of the 73 things shouted at Starmer during the confrontation, a shocking 19% were direct references to Jimmy Savile or accusations of protecting pedophiles. 41% of the chants focused on calling him a traitor, while others accused him of being controlled by the opposition. The mob had been fed a diet of conspiracy theories that painted Starmer as part of some shadowy establishment cover-up. Among the crowd was Piers Corbyn, brother of former Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn, whipping protesters into a frenzy with anti-establishment rhetoric. The footage that emerged painted a terrifying picture of modern British politics. Starmer, trying to maintain his dignity, being hustled into a police car while a mob screamed false accusations that everyone in Westminster knew were lies. Traffic cones were hurled at officers. 2 protesters were arrested for assaulting police. The situation was moments away from complete violence.
What I would say is I think the lady said dishonest. I don't think that's an appropriate word to be. I think I will make. We don't want to talk about breaking rules, do we? I don't think that's a good time to discuss. I just say, I think if he just withdraws that and works around it, I'm sure that with the knowledge that he's gained over many, many years, he can use appropriate words that is in keeping with good temperate language of this House.
But the political earthquake was only just beginning to shake Westminster to its core. The reaction from Johnson's own Conservative Party was swift and brutal. Munira Mirza, one of his most loyal advisors and longtime ally, resigned in absolute disgust. She called Johnson's comments scurrilous and refused to be associated with such tactics. It was a devastating blow from someone who had worked with him for over a decade. Chancellor Rishi Sunak publicly distanced himself, saying he would never have made such remarks. Former Cabinet Minister Julian Smith called the scenes appalling and demanded Johnson withdraw his false accusations completely. The criticism wasn't coming from the opposition. It was coming from his own side. Even victims of Jimmy Savile spoke out in horror. Their lawyers said they were appalled that Johnson was trying to weaponize their suffering for political gain. These brave survivors, who had fought for years to get justice, watched in disgust as their trauma was turned into a political football. David Lammy, who had been walking beside Starmer during the attack, didn't hold back. He directly blamed Johnson for the harassment, pointing out that the conspiracy thugs were repeating exactly the same slurs they had heard from the Prime Minister just days earlier. The line from the dispatch box to the streets of Westminster was crystal clear.
This isn't some fixable glitch in the system. It's the whole point. It's what he does. It's who he is. He knows he's dishonest and incapable of changing, so he drags everybody else down with him.
But Johnson's response revealed everything about his character and his willingness to sacrifice democracy for personal survival. Instead of apologizing or taking responsibility, Johnson offered only hollow condemnation of the protesters' behavior. He called their actions disgraceful, while completely refusing to acknowledge his role in creating the situation. Behind closed doors, Number 10 sources were briefing that it would be unreasonable to blame Johnson for the mob's actions. It was political cowardice on an industrial scale. The incident exposed something rotten at the very heart of British democracy. Here was a prime minister willing to spread lies about child abuse for temporary political advantage, a media ecosystem that amplified conspiracy theories without proper fact-checking, and a public discourse so poisoned that an opposition leader needed police protection just to walk near Parliament. Mayor of London Sadiq Khan captured the moment perfectly when he said this was what happened when fake news was amplified and given credibility by people who should know better. The guardrails of democratic discourse had been smashed, and there was no clear path back to civilized politics. The confrontation lasted only a few terrifying minutes, but its impact would reshape British politics for months to come. Starmer was physically unharmed and back at his desk within hours, yet the psychological damage lingered like a dark cloud over Westminster.
What a joke. Even now, as the latest mealy-mouthed apology stumbles out of one side of his mouth, a new set of deflections and distortions pour from the other. But the damage is already done. The public have made up their mind. They don't believe a word the Prime Minister says. They know what he is.
For the first time in modern British history, an opposition leader had been forced to flee from a mob spreading lies about child abuse. The scene played out just yards from Parliament itself, adding symbolic weight that was impossible to ignore. This was Britain, the mother of parliaments, watching its political discourse collapse in real time. Conservative MPs, already frustrated with Johnson's leadership over Partygate, saw this as the final straw. Some called it Trumpian politics, warning that Britain was sliding toward American-style political violence. The whispers of leadership challenges grew louder as MPs realized their prime minister had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. What made the incident even more disturbing was how quickly false information could be weaponized to incite real-world violence. Johnson's lie, spoken in the supposed safety of Parliament, had traveled through social media networks and conspiracy channels to create a genuine physical threat to an innocent man. The broader implications were chilling. If opposition leaders could be targeted with false accusations of protecting child abusers, if mobs could be mobilized based on deliberate lies from the highest office in the land, then British democracy itself was in serious danger. Starmer's team knew they were dealing with more than just a bad news cycle. This was an attack on the basic principles that made democratic opposition possible. Without the ability to criticize government safely, without protection from deliberate character assassination, the entire system of accountability would collapse.